Oh, hey, didn't see you there. Hello everyone, and welcome to another video. What's that? Why are we in a submarine? What's that weird creaking noise? Relax, don't worry about it. Everything is under control, the hull does that all the time. But getting to the ocean floor is gonna take a while, so in the meantime, why don't I go and tell you how I even managed to get all the way out here in the first place? It all began long before time. Just the other day, as a matter of fact. Well, just the other day on this planet anyways. With the KSP looking for another pristine destination within the Kcalbeloh System to send their next victim, brave Kerbonaut, following Sugar Kerman's thorough delta yeeting off into interstellar space. And that's when they found it. Allow me to introduce you to today's destination, Rouqea, a Haitian-type ocean planet that is caught in the unfortunate position of being right next to a gigantic black hole. Yeah, that's right, today we're going to what is basically just Miller's planet from Interstellar. One can only hope that the waves won't be quite as intense, however, using, once again, only stock parts because clearly the last two missions weren't hard enough already, were they? Now join me as today, we take on depths that no Kerbal has ever even dreamt of before! And, of course, to actually explore these great depths, we need a submarine. Duh. Allow me to present to you the Aquar, one of Kerbalkind's finest submersible vessels. I say finest, but that was more by default than anything. Because for nearly all of their history, Kerbals have been absolutely stumped as to how to get things to actually sink. Even Kerbin's proudest navies have only hardly begun to grasp the concept of underwater vehicles, because, for whatever reason, all of their materials just seem so buoyant. Like the Kraken itself is lifting them out of the water to keep all from entering its aquatic domain. That was until, miraculously, R&D discovered an intrinsic property of fairings that allow them to completely remove all buoyancy of any part that they are attached to, as long as it is done in a very specific way. Which is definitely how I'll be doing this, because I don't know about you, but I really don't feel like spamming 100 tons worth of ore tanks just to actually get this tiny craft to go underwater. And speaking of the craft, however, besides its science experiments, ballast tanks, and seafloor landing legs, you may notice one shocking detail. It's unkerbled? Diabolical, I know. Apparently the KSP's decision to do this was the result of someone who claimed to be from the future, approaching them and claiming that sending Kerbals to other stars with no plans for their return would lead to them going insane and one day returning to enact their revenge. Ridiculous, I know. What a load of nonsense. What a bunch of malarkey. But regardless, this is the decision that they made, so I suppose we'll just sit back and watch as the Aquar is launched to the stars. You may also notice that Kerbin looks just a wee bit prettier than usual, and that's because I finally flipped to the dark side and decided to install Waterfall, Volumetric Clouds, and Parallax at the same time. There, you happy now? Y'all can finally shut up now. I swear to Bob, if I see one comment about restock... Despite its picturesque surroundings, the launch here was actually fairly typical, so I suppose I'll skip ahead to the next phase of the mission. The transfer to... Jewel? Yeah, that's right. Apparently, unbeknownst to Sugar Kerman or the KSP at the time, there was a conveniently placed wormhole sitting right here in orbit of Jewel the entire time. Or was there? No, there actually wasn't. I turned it off, remember? And, as luck would have it, it was found to lead directly to the orbit of Sarah, a planet within the broader Kcalbeloh System. Needless to say, this would make interstellar journeys significantly easier from now on. After passing through the wormhole, the Aquar Xene, Xene is the name of the Xenon module, by the way, amazing, I know, then found itself on an escape trajectory out of Sarah's sphere of influence, and seizing the opportunity, fired its engines to get an encounter with the Symmetra binary system, which would then send the probe careening onto a trajectory that would take it to the outskirts of the Sunarc system. And the game's crashed. Thanks, Frank. After then adjusting some settings, and having the game not have a brain aneurysm this time, the Aquar Xene, AX, could then continue on its way, capturing some picturesque shots as it flew past the familiar duo of ice giants. Once that had been completed, it was then time for the probe to finally go interstellar for real, which it did after waiting about 5 years for a transfer window to Maelg, an L-type brown dwarf orbiting closely to Kcalbeloh, though I suppose not that close, which is also host to 2 planets of its own, and for some reason its name really reminds me of Smaug from The Hobbit, and honestly I don't know why, but it does. And thankfully, although it was only 1 stellar class down from them, Maelg did not end up crashing my game like every red dwarf star I've ever tried to visit. After completing its ejection burn, the Axe then found itself drifting off into interstellar space, where it spent over a decade waiting in cold storage before firing its engines to conduct a plane correction burn, which ended up being nearly as expensive as the actual transfer itself, thanks to the extremely high orbital speeds that Kcalbeloh's intense gravity produces. Following this absolute scam of a burn, the Axe, now looking rather, how do I put this, T-shaped? Look, this wasn't even intentional, alright? Then made the rest of its multi-decade journey to the dim, feeble star for its gravity assist. However, this was not to be your typical gravity assist, as thanks to the aforementioned extremely high orbital speeds, 1 assist from Smaug over here wouldn't actually be enough to bring our periapsis all the way down to the inner system. So, to supplement it, I had the Axe perform a lengthy burn at its periapsis to utilize the Oberth effect to amplify the deceleration, successfully dropping our periapsis all the way to Rouqea's orbit after a couple of attempts, with me more or less just guesstimating how close I could get to Maelg without receiving 4th degree sunburns. After successfully placing ourselves on a course for accretion disk irradiation, I then had the Axe perform another plane change to match the inclination of Rouqea, and then began the most difficult and laborious phase of the mission, actually slowing ourselves all the way down. As you can probably tell, we don't actually have anywhere near enough delta V to make it to Rouqea, and all too predictably, because it's literally right next to a freaking black hole, Rouqea's not going to be very helpful for gravity assists either. So, how are we actually gonna do this then? The cheat menu? No, come on. Kraken drives? No. Overclocking? No, get that out of here. What do you think I am, a war criminal? No. To slow ourselves down today, I'm actually just gonna aerobrake. Now, I know what you're thinking. Won't I just overheat and explode immediately? Well, yes, normally that would be the case, but as with many things in KSP, it turns out you can actually get around this without using cheats. And that's where this giant dumb fairing surrounding the whole craft comes in. I won't go into too much detail about how it works here, since the actual physics involved is kinda complicated, so if you're interested, go and watch this video here explaining it. Essentially, however, what you need to know is that with some trickery involving fairings, adapters, structural panels, node occlusion, and this thing called a drag cube, you can do this. Yeah, that's right. You can basically just turn your craft into the average Arizona resident and make it immune to heat. I should also state that I'm not actually the first to go to Rouqea with stock parts using this tech either. Another YouTuber called Proxima actually managed to go here and back with just stock parts using this tech. So if you think what I'm doing here is impressive, oh boy, you haven't seen nothing yet. But as you can see, despite it looking absolutely fire, we didn't actually even slow down all that much, thanks to the only part of this craft that's actually able to receive drag being these octagonal struts crammed like sardines into the back here. So we'll need to do this quite a few times, like a lot of times. I honestly lost track of how many aerobrakes I even had to do. It was most likely at least 40, possibly even 50. Essentially though, after each blistering aerobrake had been completed, what I would immediately do is look for a suitable orbit to set up the next one, so as to make me only have to spend a few dozen meters per second to get the next encounter, as opposed to a few thousand. Sometimes I'd get lucky and be able to swing past again on the very next orbit, but other times, well, let's just say I wasn't quite as lucky. In total, this process took almost 400 years. So you can bet I was making heavy use of the BetterTimeWarp mod to allow myself to complete this mission before the next Ice Age, GTA 6, or even the launch of Artemis 2. Nah, that still wouldn't happen by then, who am I kidding? I also had to perform a few correction burns on top of this to prevent my periapsis from getting too low, but really I suppose the video can do the rest of the talking for me here. Until, after what was probably several 100,000, possibly even million, years back on Kerbin due to time dilation, the axe was left with its final couple of aerobrakes. At this point, due to the aforementioned corrections we'd had to do, the Zine module was actually almost out of fuel, and as our velocity had gotten lower and lower, we were facing diminishing returns with each subsequent aerobrake. To be honest, at this point, I was genuinely starting to get a little bit nervous that we wouldn't actually make it at all, and had made several quick saves to fall back on in case things didn't work out, including the wonderfully named Kcalbeloh Gaming. Lucky for us though, now that we were actually traveling at speeds somewhat within the realm of sanity, Rouqea's gravity was starting to have much more of an effect on our orbit with each pass, and as such, Messenger-esque gravity assist had actually become the dominant force in slowing the axe's orbital speed around Kcalbeloh. And thankfully, after setting up one final assist, it placed us on an orbit that was nearly identical to Rouqea's itself. All we had to do now was pass by for the final time. The Zine's 4 ion engines then fired overtime. Well, as much as they could anyways, with the measly power supply. and the craft then made its final flyby of the watery planet, before on the very next encounter, some 4 years later, Rouqea's atmosphere finally slowed the speeding probe below escape velocity, and an orbit was successfully reached. Victory. Following this monumental victory, I then proceeded to aerobrake the Axe down to a lower orbit, and before long, it was finally time to land and deploy the sub. Once the time was right, in order to slow down, I deployed the rear fairing, and then unleashed the craft from its wacky heat-proof front fairing. The parachute was then deployed, and the Aquar then gently floated down to the water's surface through the calm morning skies. Until, at long last, Splashdown. Except, I now hear you saying, isn't this a submarine? You know, isn't this supposed to sink? Why, yes it is. And despite me successfully testing this exact same design repeatedly on both Kerbin and Rouqea, it now just doesn't work. Thanks, KSP. Well, that's a bummer. See you in the next one, I guess. No. Of course I wasn't going to just end it there. When I went back to testing the sub, I did notice one key difference between the test sub and the actual Aquar. The parachute was deployed. Because apparently, for whatever stupid reason, when you deploy a parachute in KSP, it adds a shit ton of buoyancy to it. Guess what? It still wouldn't sink. Damn. So, rather begrudgingly, I then decided to just swap out the Aquar for an identical new submarine that I then placed at the exact same coordinates. And that's when our dive into the uncharted abyss began. The Aquar slowly began to sink deeper and deeper, soon finding itself engulfed in complete darkness. Hey, at least the water's nice and warm, alright? That's right, it turns out really this whole planet is just a giant hot tub.
Warning, entering ecological dead zone. Adding report to databank.
And on the way down, I then spotted some debris from the Zine that had also started sinking, and upon closer inspection, found that it was actually the ion engines that had served to bring us all the way out here in the first place. Soon after it had inspected the ion engines, the Aquar was then rocked by them exploding onto the ocean floor, meaning that we were nearing the bottom. And sure enough, the seabed then revealed itself before us, and the Aquar touched down at a depth of 4,494 meters below sea level, which honestly was not nearly as deep as I had hoped or even expected. I mean, that's only about the average depth of Earth's oceans after all. But not to worry, we've got engines on this thing after all. How about we go for a little cruise through the abyss? What could possibly go wrong? Look, I'll try my best not to run into any Leviathans or Lovecraftian horrors, alright? No guarantees, though. According to Rouqea's actual in-game description, the seafloor here is actually supposed to be made up of exotic forms of ice, crushed down under the immense pressure of the water above it. It also created an eerie contrast between the white seafloor and the strange red glow that surrounded the sub as it descended to a depth of minus 5,000 meters, before once again landing on the seabed to transfer some fuel. While on the seabed, I then managed to pan the camera below the terrain and spotted what appeared to be a deep trench to the Aquar's north. After then transferring the fuel and activating maximum thalassophobia mode, I then continued on. But sadly didn't find much apart from more exotic ice and Parallax glitching out and making it look like as if venom had appeared or something. Now unable to burn much more fuel without becoming positively buoyant and floating back to the surface, but still wanting to explore a bit more, I then decided to teleport the sub over one of the deep trenches just to see how deep this ocean really goes. I also don't know why, but this particular science report kinda gave me the chills as well. The Aquar then sunk into the immense depths once more, this time reaching far deeper than the seafloor at its original landing site, in fact even deeper than the Mariana Trench. Until, at long last, the seafloor once again came into view, this time cast in an eerie, blood-red glow that very much reminded me of something like iron lung. Intrigued, and perhaps somewhat foolishly, I then took the sub even deeper. Until, at a depth of almost 16 kilometers, the Aquar stumbled across and nearly crashed into a mysterious crystalline structure, which came as a bit of a surprise, seeing as I wasn't really expecting to actually find anything down here. Thanks, Parallax. Now, I don't know, exactly what this is supposed to be, but I assume it's supposed to be like a structure of that exotic ice I mentioned, crushed under the pressure, but when I first saw this thing, it just appeared, right in front of me. I was like, what the hell is that? After regaining its bearings, the Aquar then proceeded to land on top of the structure, all the while cutting through the eerie red waters. You know, I feel as though we probably shouldn't stay down here for too long. This place makes Kerbin's smiley-faced trench look like a puddle after all. I feel as though something's watching us. Who am I kidding? There's no way anything could possibly survive down here. Right, Dave? Dave?
It's seen us.
What do you mean it's seen us? And, speaking of watching, thanks for watching and see you next time, dweebs.